Hi everyone, welcome to my new video on Facebook and YouTube. This is a process on watercolor for Holbrook's Stringbean, the book that will be coming out pretty soon. What you're looking at here is the basic pencils. So everything that I've used with the lightbox that I shared in a recent video I've done to create this. So everything is pretty basic. Things will still be refined. There'll actually be another line art to go on top of this after I color. So I'll add the color and then go back and actually then with a pencil or brush actually create the line. So you'll see there's strange little overlaps like this, so that actually doesn't exist in the watercolor piece. So as for tools, real quick, I'm going to be using this small little travel container that you can put water in and whatever else you might need on the road. And then I also have a travel kit here full of water as well. This has a clamp associated with it that actually will clamp onto your board or your easel, so we'll be using that too. Now the reason I have three different ones is that sometimes I use a brush for one color. I don't clean brushes a lot. My process is I use the same brush and I'll go in and color a certain area, and if I'm not going too much lighter or darker, I'll actually keep the pigment in the brush and just wash it out briefly and then move on. Now the types of brushes I'm using, I have a Winsor Newton Gold number 6. This is a 530 brush, so the tip is rounded and pointed. I'm going over first all the basic colors, so the greens and the blue. In the wheat field too, I'll be adding some color in there. So a very basic color, just kind of touching over everything. I'm also going to be using this type of brush here, which is an artisan shop brush. This is a minute series. This is a 7 round, so you can see this is actually similar to the brush I shared earlier, but smaller in the length and the width. And then I'm using a thick Faber-Castell brush. This is a number 6. This is a thicker version of those two, and it's rounded. So everything that has a lot of color, so a lot of green, and there are also a lot of blues and the wheat and the browns also for the fence line. This extends onward to the left, and I'll be sharing a little bit more of that with you too. I'm using a number 1. This is a weird brush I found, the brand anyway. This is a Babuji brush. It's a Japanese brush. It's been sold, and it is sold in sets. So I'm using a 0 and a 1 from that. The 0 is, of course, a little thinner, but all of these are rounded and long. Also, the last thing I'm going to be sharing is a couple aqua brushes. This has water inside of it, so it has its own reservoir. And this is also really good for doing large areas, swaths of areas. Now, as for watercolor, I prefer 2 different kinds of watercolor. The first is Winsor Newton set. You can see by my palette it's really messy because I do not always clean the brush out entirely. I like to carry pigment over into another area if I'm using it. This is a travel kit, but this works really good. These little blocks, these little cakes are wonderful because you can actually go online and order a certain color and insert it and take one out. And I also use a very cheap type of watercolor that I've got literally at the dollar store. I don't even know the brand name of it, but I don't know. I love it. It works really good, and the colors seem to blend very well. Plus, it has a very nice range of different types of hues for the color. So that's the colors I'm using. Now I'm going to actually start with this. I'm going to move it over some so you can see. So this extends. There's a cabin to the far right. And then as you move to the left, you're going to see the characters that we worked on in the Lightbox series start to pop out. And those are here now, and you can see the kind of finished version of that. So this is actually started the other day using the Lightbox. And there's more to this actually. If you were to keep on going up with the canvas, you'd actually see a lot more. Now here's a glimpse of a finished page from Holbrook's Stringbean. Now in this page you can see that I've went in, I've added the color. You can see a little bit of the pencil line maybe if you look really close, but most of the line art is done afterwards in black pigment or even with a pencil. I'll go over top of the watercolor and draw in those areas. Now as for this particular page, this is called a spread, and the reason it's called a spread is that it's actually 2 pages of the book. So if you were to open this up and look at it, you're going to see 2 pages here. The spine will be about right where the little tiny little walkway comes up through, separating the animals from the girl. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to start I think probably here on the grass. So I'm going to move this over a little bit more so you can see, starting on the grass area, and then also maybe here you can see the cabin maybe. just a little bit of the cabin on the far right. So we'll start in this area here. So I'm going to grab first the thicker rounded brush. I'm going to grab the large Faber-Castell. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of water in there, and I'm going to pull some of the very light green from the cheaper watercolor. And how I do this is I'll set my watercolor off to the side like that and get my brush wet, and then go in and I'll get each of the dabs or cakes that I'm going to be using. I'll put some water in them. So I'm going to be using a lot of this green here, so at first, and so I'm going to go ahead and get the cake wet itself. So this has water in it. Now also at some point I will go back. What I'll do is I'll use a spray bottle, and so these little miniature spray bottles are great because what you can do is you can go in on your watercolor palette and just spray this and get each cake wet or moist that you want to be using. That way you can pull color out pretty easy and fast. Now I like to start out with a lot of water in my brush because I do not want to put a whole lot of pigment down. I want to basically just very lightly start to add color, because you always go from light to dark. No matter what it is, I think is the best approach. Even with cross-hatching, if you were doing ink, you'd want to start out very light and then go very dark, because it's easier to add to something, of course, than it is to take away. So if you're adding pigment, it's great, but if you have to go in and take away pigment, it's very strenuous. How to do that is another video to itself, but I will say this much. If you have an area that is going to be a little bit challenging, you have a lot of detail in it, you have maybe your brushes don't really work suitable for it or work well for it, then what you can do is add a product on there which actually will block out the canvas, and so you cannot add any type of watercolor to it. It actually blocks it out. It works almost like a wax, and then once it dries you can go in and watercolor. Once you finish watercoloring, that area that you've blocked out, you can go in and rub it, and that wax will just pull right out. Now I'm making short little brush strokes, and I'm leaving white in there. I'm not going in here painting like a painting, because that's not the point. You want to leave white, and you want to leave areas that pigment does not really fill up. Those areas later may remain white, or you may actually go in later and add a lot of more color. So I don't like to fill up an entire area with pigment. I'm basically just going over these large areas, so there'll be a lot of green here. The grass, of course, will be digitally added later, especially the grass that is closer up, I should say, to the foreground. So what's closer to you will be added later. I'm going in very lightly, just adding this green in. I don't really want to put a whole lot of color right now. Now, in terms of like using brushes, I've not been trained formally with painting, and probably obvious to some people if you look at my work, but I do have assortment of tools that I like to use more than others, and I'm really just I'm loving using the aqua brushes. I'm not using aqua brush at the moment, but the aqua brushes are great because you really do not have to carry a lot of more tools with you on the road. If you're traveling, you could literally take one brush full of water and then refill it. And they come in various sizes. I think they're around maybe $10 for a set, and with the set I think you get 4 brushes. I might be wrong, and maybe more than that. Now I will say this though, if you find aqua brushes that are really cheap, $3.99, $4.99, I suggest just avoid getting those and save up until you can actually get the more expensive set. And the reason for that is I've tried both of those. I could create an entire YouTube channel on using the different types of tools that I've used, the good and ups and downs and bads for everything. And what I found is the cheaper brushes, they actually end up clogging and they break down, and before long you've just wasted that money. I think from the set I bought, there was like 4 or 5 brushes. There's one that works now, and the only thing that I use it for is when I'm going in doing very large areas of full color, not like this where you're actually speckling it. I mean, that's about it. That's the only real purpose that I can find for it. Now, if you allow a certain area to dry after you've went ahead and added watercolor to it, then you can go back and put a different tone of color. There's some green in the trees up here and in the mountains, And for this, I want to leave shading. So I'll go in, and the same thing with down here on the grass. I'll add color but leave areas white. Now, this isn't a video on how to actually work on the entire piece. So we're not finishing the piece today. What I'll do is I'll work, and here in a second show you kind of what the process was and what I've gotten done today, and you can see how this this process works. Alright, so I'll check back with you just in a moment. Alright, so we've jumped ahead in the future just a little bit, and you should be able to see here from what I've done that I've used the same color and created what we call hues or shadow on the landscape. Now, this is pretty easily done. I've used the brushes that I showed you at the beginning of the video. This isn't necessarily about technique and walking you through the entire completed drawing, as it is just a kind of a glimpse into process. And process is important. A lot of artists actually will keep their process very, very secret, because they'll find a certain way to use a tool or a medium, and they'll keep that secret. They do not want other artists to know, because, well, other artists will then start using that technique and duplicating. But what I'm showing here is pretty basic stuff. There's no secrets in here. This is pretty 101 101 class when it or application suggestions when it comes to watercolor. Now, I'm using a different type of green, of course, for this though. Down at the bottom, you notice there's browns, there's rose, and gold. So up here is the lighter green. I used more water and created that effect, and then went back and used less water and made it darker. The darker areas then just resemble shadow. You don't want an entire green landscape, that's the point. You want to break it up, and this helps to break up the plane of your canvas from a lot of green up here to the green on the grass. So in the story, this is going into nighttime, and I've changed a little bit of the onset of fall colors coming in throughout the story. So by the time you reach, the next to the last spread, you're really seeing how that comes into play. I'll go ahead now and go across the canvas and show you how. Remember how it looked at the beginning. So we have just a very light application of the green here, and then as you actually go in and start darkening it using less water, more pigment, you start to get this effect when you start to build your shadows up and such. So it's a really fun way to apply watercolor, round brushes, different sizes, and do this from the ground up. So thanks for watching. I hope you got a little bit from this video today. I'll be sharing some more techniques and processes as we move along. The technique videos will be longer, process shorter like this. Thanks so much for checking in. I'm Epling. Until next time, take care and keep growing.